The coffee shop on Maple Street had seen its share of awkward encounters, but nothing quite like what happened on that rainy Tuesday afternoon when 6-year-old Emma Rodriguez decided to take matters into her own small hands. What started as a simple trip for hot chocolate would end up changing 3 lives forever, all because one determined little girl refused to let her papa eat dinner alone for another night. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Rodriguez had always been what people politely called imposing. Standing at 6 feet 8 inches with shoulders that seemed to require their own zip code, he'd grown accustomed to the way conversations died when he walked into a room. Children would peek out from behind their mother's legs, and even grown men would unconsciously take a step back when shaking his hand. It wasn't intentional. Marcus had the gentlest soul you could imagine, but his sheer physical presence had a way of making people forget that giants could be shy too. The morning had started like every other Tuesday for the past 8 months. Emma had bounced into his bedroom at exactly 6:30, her dark curls still messy from sleep, announcing that she'd dreamed about pancakes shaped like butterflies. Marcus had obliged, as he always did, carefully crafting each pancake into something resembling winged creatures, while Emma provided running commentary about which ones looked most likely to fly away. "Papa," she had said between bites, syrup decorating the corner of her mouth. "Mrs. Patterson next door says you need a wife." Marcus had nearly choked on his coffee. Mrs. Patterson, their 70-something neighbor, had apparently been more observant than he'd realized. Ever since Emma's mother had left them, walked out one morning with nothing but a suitcase and a note saying she couldn't do this anymore, Marcus had been navigating the treacherous waters of single parenthood with the grace of a cargo ship. In a bathtub. "Mrs. Patterson talks too much," he had mumbled, reaching for a napkin to clean Emma's face. "But she's right, isn't she? You eat sad sandwiches for dinner." It was true. While Emma enjoyed her carefully prepared meals, grilled cheese cut into perfect triangles, chicken nuggets arranged like smiley faces, vegetables disguised as anything but vegetables, Marcus had fallen into a routine of hastily assembled sandwiches. Consumed while standing over the kitchen sink, watching Emma play in the backyard through the window. The conversation had been forgotten by the time they'd bundled up for their weekly trip to Rosie's Coffee Corner, a cozy little establishment. That had become their Tuesday tradition. Emma loved the hot chocolate that came with marshmallows shaped like tiny hearts, and Marcus appreciated that the owner, Rosie Chun, never seemed startled by his size. She'd simply nod when they walked in, already reaching for Emma's usual cup. Rain had started just as they'd parked, turning their short walk into a sprint. Emma shrieked with delight as puddles splashed around her bright yellow rain boots, while Marcus hunched his shoulders against the downpour, trying to keep his daughter dry beneath his massive frame. Inside, the coffee shop was unusually quiet. For a Tuesday afternoon, the usual cluster of laptop-wielding college students was absent, likely deterred by the weather. Only a handful of customers dotted the mismatched chairs and tables that gave Rosie's its charm. The air smelled of cinnamon and freshly ground beans, with an underlying hint of the vanilla candles Rosie lit during the darker months. Emma had immediately claimed their usual table by the window, climbing onto the cushioned bench and pressing her nose against the glass to watch the rain create rivers in the street outside. Marcus had gone to the counter, exchanging pleasantries with Rosie while she prepared Emma's hot chocolate and his usual black coffee. It was on his way back to the table, carefully balancing the steaming cups, that Marcus first noticed her. She was tucked into the corner booth, almost hidden behind a stack of books and papers that suggested either a very dedicated student or someone trying very hard to disappear. Her auburn hair fell like a curtain across her face as she hunched over what appeared to be a laptop, fingers flying across the keys with the intensity of someone on a deadline. She wore an oversized cream sweater that seemed designed to help her blend into the background, and Marcus might have missed her entirely if not for the way she kept glancing nervously toward the door every few minutes. There was something about her posture, the way her shoulders curved protectively inward, how she seemed to shrink whenever another customer walked past her table, that struck a chord with Marcus. He recognized that particular brand of shyness, the kind that came from a lifetime of trying to take up as little space as possible. It was the exact opposite of his own problem, but somehow he understood it completely. "Papa, you're staring," Emma announced loudly enough for half the coffee shop to hear. Marcus quickly averted his gaze, feeling heat creep up his neck. "I wasn't staring, Mia, just thought looking around." Emma followed his previous line of sight with the unsettled directness that only children possessed. "Oh, you were looking at the pretty lady with the books. She looks lonely." "Emma, use your inside voice," Marcus whispered, settling into his chair with considerable difficulty. The furniture at Rosie's, while charming, wasn't designed for someone of his proportions, but Emma was on a mission now, her 6-year-old brain clearly working through some complex social mathematics. She studied the woman in the corner with the same intensity she usually reserved for particularly challenging jigsaw puzzles. "She keeps looking at the door like she's waiting for someone," Emma observed. "But no one's come to sit with her, and she's been here since before we got here." Marcus tried to redirect his daughter's attention to her hot chocolate, but Emma had inherited his mother's stubborn streak along with his father's sense of justice. Once she identified a problem that needed solving, she was like a tiny, determined bulldozer. The woman in question seemed blissfully unaware of the scrutiny from across the room. She was completely absorbed in her work, occasionally pushing her hair back from her face in a gesture that revealed delicate features and wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down her nose. Every so often, she'd pause in her typing to sip from a mug that had clearly gone cold long ago, making a small face at the temperature before immediately forgetting and taking another sip 20 minutes later. "What do you think she does, Papa?" Emma asked, stirring her hot chocolate with laser focus. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe she's a writer or a teacher preparing lessons." Marcus found himself studying the woman again, despite his best efforts. There was something almost ethereal about her concentration, the way she seemed to exist in her own little bubble of productivity. "She has very neat handwriting," Emma noted, and Marcus realized with horror that his daughter had been reading over the woman's shoulder from across the room. "And she draws little flowers in the margins of her papers." "Emma, it's not polite to spy on people." "I'm not spying, I'm observing. Mrs. Patterson taught me the difference. Spying is when you hide and watch people do private things. Observing is when you notice things about people in public places so you can understand them better." Marcus made a mental note to have another conversation with Mrs. Patterson about appropriate lessons for her 6-year-olds. The woman suddenly looked up from her laptop, and for a brief moment, her eyes met Marcus's across the coffee shop. The connection lasted only a second before she quickly looked away, a flush spreading across her cheeks. But in that instant, Marcus caught a glimpse of intelligence and kindness, along with an unmistakable sadness that made something in his chest tighten. "She has pretty eyes," Emma declared. "Like the color of honey when the sun shines through it." She wasn't wrong. Even from across the room, there had been something striking about the woman's gaze, warm and golden, but with depths that suggested stories untold. The afternoon wore on, with Emma alternating between her hot chocolate and providing a running commentary on every customer who entered the coffee shop. She had opinions about the businessman who ordered his latte extra hot. "He's probably always cold because he wears such thin clothes." The elderly couple sharing a piece of apple pie. "They're celebrating something happy, look how they keep smiling at each other." And the teenager who couldn't decide between a muffin and a cookie. She should get both because life is short and sugar makes everything better. But her attention kept returning to the woman in the corner who had moved on from typing to handwriting notes in a leather journal. Her penmanship was indeed neat, as Emma had observed, And she did indeed draw small, decorative flowers in the margins, tiny daisies and roses that suggested an artistic soul hiding beneath the practical exterior. "I think she's writing a book," Emma announced after a particularly intense observation. "A book about lonely people who need friends." "What makes you think that?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about his daughter's reasoning. "Because she keeps stopping and looking out the window with sad eyes, like she's thinking about lonely people. And then she writes really fast, like the words are trying to escape before she can catch them." Marcus was continually amazed by Emma's perception. At 6 years old, she seemed to understand human nature better than most adults he knew. It was both a blessing and a source of constant anxiety. Her emotional intelligence meant she was incredibly empathetic, but it also meant she felt things deeply and noticed things he sometimes wished she wouldn't. The rain outside had intensified, creating a steady drumbeat against the windows that made the coffee shop feel even cozier. More customers had trickled in, seeking shelter from the storm, but the woman in the corner remained in her own world, occasionally glancing at her phone, with an expression that grew more disappointed each time. "I think she's being stood up," Emma whispered conspiratorially. "Stood up? Like in the movies. When someone promises to meet you somewhere but doesn't come. She keeps checking her phone and looking at the door, but she's trying to pretend she doesn't care." The observation hit closer to home than Marcus cared to admit. He recognized that particular brand of disappointment, the way hope slowly deflated into resignation, the careful mask of indifference that never quite hid the hurt underneath. He'd worn that expression himself more times than he could count, especially in the months after Emma's mother had left. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As if summoned by their conversation, the woman's phone buzzed. She answered quickly, hoping to light up her features for a moment, before gradually fading into something that looked suspiciously like resigned disappointment. The conversation was brief, and when she hung up, she stared at the phone for a long moment before carefully placing it face down on the table. "He's not coming," Emma said with the certainty of someone who'd witnessed this scenario in countless Disney movies. Marcus watched as the woman began slowly packing up her things, her movements careful and deliberate. There was dignity in the way she handled the disappointment, no dramatic gestures or visible tears. Just a quiet acceptance that spoke of experience with letdowns. "We should do something," Emma declared. "Emma, it's not our business, but Papa, she looks so sad. And you always tell me that when someone is sad, we should try to help if we can." It was true. Marcus had raised Emma with the belief that kindness was never optional, that helping others was simply what decent people did. But there was a difference between helping someone with groceries and inserting yourself into a stranger's personal disappointments. The woman stood up, slinging her bag over her shoulder and gathering her papers. She was smaller than Marcus had initially thought, probably barely reaching his chest, which made her seem even more fragile as she prepared to venture back into the storm. Alone. Emma was practically vibrating with the need to take action. "Papa, she doesn't have an umbrella." Marcus followed his daughter's gaze and realized she was right. The woman was pulling on a thin jacket that would provide minimal protection against the downpour outside. "Maybe we could offer her a ride," Emma suggested hopefully. "Emma, we can't just offer rides to strangers." "But she's not really a stranger anymore. We've been observing her for an hour. We know she likes honey-colored tea, writes stories about lonely people, draws flowers, and has been stood up by someone who doesn't deserve her." The logic was simultaneously flawed and irrefutable, in the way that only 6-year-old reasoning could be. The woman had finished gathering her belongings and was heading toward the door, her step hesitant as she clearly dreaded the prospect of walking through the rain. She paused at the exit, looking out at the storm with visible reluctance. That's when Emma made her move, before Marcus could stop her. She had slipped out of her seat and was walking directly toward the woman with the kind of fearless determination that made Marcus both proud and terrified on a daily basis. "Excuse me," Emma announced, appearing beside the woman's table like a tiny ambassador on an important diplomatic mission. "Are you okay? You look really sad." The woman startled, nearly dropping her bag as she turned to find a small girl with serious dark eyes staring up at her with genuine concern. For a moment, she seemed too surprised to speak. I'm fine, sweetie," she managed, her voice soft with a slight tremor that betrayed her words. "Just heading home." Emma tilted her head, studying the woman's face with the unblinking intensity. That made adults uncomfortable. "But you were waiting for someone who didn't come, weren't you? That's not fine. That's disappointing." Marcus was already rising from his chair, his massive frame unfolding with practiced caution to avoid knocking anything over. He could see the panic in the woman's eyes as she registered his approach, not fear, exactly, but the instinctive wariness of someone who preferred to remain invisible. "Emma," he called softly, trying to inject warning into his voice without sounding harsh. "Come back to our table." But Emma had inherited more than just stubbornness from her mother's side of the family. She had also gotten an uncanny ability to read people's hearts, and right now, her heart was telling her that this woman needed help, regardless of what adult social conventions might dictate. "I'm Emma Rodriguez," she announced, extending her small hand with the formality of someone conducting important business. "And that's my papa, Marcus. He's really tall, but he's not scary, even though people think he is. He makes butterfly pancakes and knows all the words to Disney songs." The woman looked from Emma's expectant face to Marcus, who had stopped a respectful distance away, clearly torn between retrieving his daughter and not wanting to intrude further. When she spoke, her voice carried a hint of amusement beneath the nervousness. "I'm Charlotte Walsh," she said, accepting Emma's handshake with surprising solemnity. "And butterfly pancakes sound wonderful. See, Papa? She likes butterfly pancakes." "That's a good sign," Emma announced, as if this information was crucial intelligence in some grand plan only she understood. Marcus felt heat crawl up his neck. "Again, Emma, Ms. Walsh probably has places to be ... "Actually," Charlotte interrupted, then paused as if surprised by her own boldness. "Actually, I don't. My appointment was canceled." There was a careful neutrality in the way she said appointment that didn't fool anyone, least of all Emma. "You mean your date stood you up," Emma said with the brutal honesty that only children possessed. "That's really rude. My papa would never do that to anyone." If the floor of Rosie's coffee corner had opened up to swallow Marcus whole, he would have considered it a mercy. Instead, he found himself standing there like a mountain of mortification, while his 6-year-old daughter conducted what appeared to be an impromptu character reference. "Emma, that's not appropriate." "But it's true," Emma protested. "You're always on time for everything. You were even on time when I was born, and Grandma says babies are never on time." Charlotte made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh, and when Marcus dared to look at her, he caught the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It transformed her entire face, adding warmth to features that had seemed carved from worry. "Your daughter is very observant," she said, adjusting her bag strap nervously, "and very kind." "She gets the observant part from her grandmother," Marcus said, shooting a meaningful look at Emma. "The kind part too, though. Sometimes her kindness lacks ... boundaries." "Boundaries are overrated," Emma declared with the confidence of someone who had clearly been listening to adult conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. "Mrs. Patterson says that good people help other people, even when it's inconvenient." "Mrs. Patterson says a lot of things," Marcus muttered. The rain outside chose that moment to intensify, sending sheets of water cascading down the windows with renewed fury. Charlotte glanced toward the door with visible dread, pulling her thin jacket tighter around herself. "You really don't have an umbrella," Emma observed. "Papa, we have that big umbrella in the car. The one that could cover a whole family of elephants." Marcus found himself in the uncomfortable position of having his daughter orchestrate a social interaction he was completely unprepared for. Under normal circumstances, he might have simply offered the umbrella and gone back to his table. But there was something about Charlotte Walsh that made him want to extend the conversation, despite every shy instinct telling him to retreat. If you're walking to your car, we could share the umbrella," he offered, the words feeling clumsy in his mouth. "It really is big enough for several people." Charlotte hesitated, clearly weighing her options. Getting soaked versus accepting help from strangers. Privacy versus practicality. Marcus could almost see the internal debate playing out across her features. "Please?" Emma added, employing the weaponized sweetness that had gotten her out of trouble more times than Marcus cared to count. "Papa gets really worried when people don't have proper rain protection. He once gave his jacket to a mailman during a snowstorm." "That was different," Marcus protested weakly. "Mr. Peterson had been walking his route for hours in that weather. See? He cares about people," Emma said to Charlotte, as if presenting evidence in a court case. "And he's really good at holding umbrellas because his arms are so long, like a friendly giant." The comparison to a friendly giant seemed to break through Charlotte's reserve. She looked up at Marcus, really looked at him, and he found himself holding his breath as those honey-colored eyes studied his face. Whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you. That's very kind." Emma clapped her hands together as if she'd just successfully negotiated a peace treaty. "Perfect. Papa, go get the umbrella." "I'll keep Charlotte company." Marcus hesitated. Leaving his daughter with a complete stranger went against every parental instinct he possessed, but Charlotte hardly seemed threatening. If anything, she looked like she might bolt at the first sudden movement. "I'll be right back," he said, then added more quietly to Charlotte, "She's very chatty. Feel free to tell her if she's asking too many questions." "I like chatty," Charlotte replied, and something in her voice suggested she meant it. The sprint to the car was a brief but thorough soaking. By the time Marcus returned with the umbrella, which was indeed large enough to shelter a small crowd, his shirt was clinging uncomfortably to his shoulders and his hair was dripping steadily. Through the coffee shop window, he could see Emma and Charlotte deep in conversation, his daughter's hands moving expressively while Charlotte listened with what appeared to be genuine interest. Inside, Emma was in full storytelling mode, apparently, recounting the time she'd convinced Marcus to let her paint his fingernails pink for a tea party. And he wore the pink nails to the grocery store because he promised he wouldn't take it off until after the tea party was over, Emma was saying, her eyes bright with the memory. Mrs. Henderson at the checkout said he was setting a good example for father involvement. Charlotte was smiling now, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her look years younger. "That's very sweet of him. Papa's the best," Emma declared with absolute conviction. "Even when he's scared of talking to new people, he still tries to be nice to everyone." Marcus cleared his throat as he approached, hoping to derail whatever other embarrassing anecdotes his daughter might be preparing to share. Ready to make a run for it? The umbrella was indeed enormous, a golf umbrella that Marcus had bought specifically for Chicago's unpredictable weather. Under its shelter, the three of them formed an odd little group, Marcus trying to angle the umbrella to protect both Charlotte and Emma while keeping himself reasonably dry. Charlotte walking carefully to avoid puddles in her canvas shoes, and Emma skipping between them like she was part of some grand adventure. "Where are you parked?" Marcus asked as they stepped out into the storm. "About 2 blocks down," Charlotte replied, raising her voice over the sound of rain hammering against the umbrella. "The green Honda." 2 blocks was hardly far, but in weather like this, it might as well have been 2 miles. Marcus found himself unconsciously adjusting his pace to match Charlotte's shorter steps, while Emma provided running commentary on their progress. This is like being in a rain fort, Emma announced, delighted by the drumbeat of water against the umbrella overhead. Charlotte, do you like rain? Usually, Charlotte admitted. Just not when I'm not prepared for it. Papa always checks the weather 3 times before we go anywhere, Emma confided. He says being prepared is the difference between an adventure and a disaster. Your papa sounds very wise. He is. He knows lots of things. Like how to fix broken toys and make the perfect hot chocolate and fold fitted sheets, which Grandma says is impossible for most men. Marcus caught Charlotte glancing up at him with what might have been impressed surprise, and he felt that familiar heat creeping up his neck again. Fitted sheets aren't that complicated, he mumbled. They are too, Emma protested. I tried to help once and made a nest instead of a folded sheet. Papa had to start over. They'd reached Charlotte's car, a sensible sedan that had seen better years but was well maintained. She fumbled with her keys, hands slightly shaky from cold and nerves. Thank you, she said, turning to face them under the umbrella's protection. Both of you. This was ... You didn't have to help. Papa always helps people, Emma said matter-of-factly. It's one of his rules. Like how we always return shopping carts and hold doors open and say please and thank you. Charlotte's smile was soft and genuine as she looked down at Emma. Those are very good rules. There was a moment of awkward silence as they all stood there, the social script unclear. Marcus found himself reluctant to end the interaction, but he couldn't think of a natural way to extend it either. Charlotte seemed similarly uncertain, her keys clutched in her hand as she made no move toward her car door. It was Emma who broke the impasse, as she so often did. Charlotte, what were you writing in your notebook? The one with all the flower drawings? Emma, Marcus warned gently, but Charlotte didn't seem to mind the question. I'm working on a children's book, she admitted. About a little girl who helps lonely people find friends. Emma's eyes went wide with excitement. Really, that's exactly what I like to do. Papa says I have a gift for bringing people together. Is that so? Charlotte's eyes crinkled with amusement as she glanced at Marcus. I can see that. Maybe you could write about us, Emma suggested with the enthusiastic logic of someone who had just solved a complex puzzle. About how we helped you with the umbrella, and how Papa is really nice even though he's shy, and how sometimes the best things happen when it's raining. Marcus wanted to disappear into his own jacket, but Charlotte was nodding thoughtfully. That could make a lovely story, she agreed, though I'd want to make sure I got all the details right. You could come to dinner and ask us questions, Emma announced, as if this was the most natural suggestion in the world. Papa makes really good spaghetti, and we have a big table with extra chairs. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and mortification in equal measure. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he waited for Charlotte's polite refusal, the gentle letdown that would end this surreal encounter and allow them all to return to their normal, separate lives. Instead, Charlotte Walsh did something that would change everything. She said yes. The silence that followed, Charlotte's acceptance stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Marcus stared at her as if she'd just announced she could fly, while Emma bounced on her toes with barely contained excitement. You said yes, Marcus finally managed, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. Charlotte's cheeks flushed pink, and she tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear. I did. I'm sorry, that was presumptuous of me. Your daughter was just being polite, and No. Emma interrupted, grabbing Charlotte's hand with both of hers. You weren't being presumptuous. That's what presumptuous means, right, Papa? When someone assumes something that might not be true. But this is true. We really do want you to come to dinner. Marcus found himself nodding before his brain had fully caught up with the situation. Emma's right. The invitation was genuine. Just ... unexpected. The rain continued to drum against the umbrella, creating a cocoon of sound that somehow made the conversation feel more intimate despite taking place on a public sidewalk. Charlotte shifted her weight, clearly battling some internal debate. "I should probably mention that I'm a terrible dinner guest," she said with a self-deprecating smile. "I talk too much when I'm nervous, and I always offer to help with dishes, even when people tell me not to." "Papa loves it when people help with dishes," Emma announced. "He says teamwork makes everything more fun. And talking too much isn't bad. I do it all the time, and Papa never seems to mind." "That's different." Marcus protested mildly. "You're my daughter. I'm legally obligated to listen to everything you say." "But you listen because you want to, not because you have to," Emma corrected with the wisdom that occasionally emerged from her 6-year-old observations. "There's a difference." Charlotte was watching this exchange with growing amusement, and Marcus realized she was seeing something most people never witnessed: the easy rapport he shared with his daughter when he wasn't worrying about making a good impression on anyone else. "What time should I come?" Charlotte asked, and the question sent a small thrill of panic through Marcus as he realized this was actually happening. 6 o'clock, Emma answered before Marcus could speak. "That gives Papa time to make the sauce from scratch, and it gives you time to go home and change into comfortable clothes. You should wear something soft, because Papa's couch is really good for curling up after dinner." Marcus cleared his throat. "You don't have to stay for the couch part." Emma gets ahead of herself sometimes. "I like getting ahead of myself," Charlotte sighed, surprising them both. "It's been a while since I had somewhere to get ahead to." There was something wistful in her voice that made Marcus want to ask questions he didn't have the right to ask. Instead, he found himself offering his phone number so she could text if she couldn't find their house, then immediately wondering if that seemed too forward. Charlotte programmed the number into her phone with careful attention, as if it were important information she couldn't afford to lose. When she looked up, her expression was softer than it had been all afternoon. "Thank you," she said simply. "Both of you. I can't remember the last time someone invited me to dinner just because they wanted to." Emma frowned at this revelation. "What do you mean? Why else would people invite you to dinner?" "Well, sometimes it's business dinners, or family obligations, or—" Charlotte trailed off, seeming to realize she was explaining adult social politics to a child who still believed all human interactions were genuine. "Those don't count," Emma declared with absolute authority. "Real dinner invitations are when people want you to come because they like you and want to spend time with you, like ours." The simplicity of the statement hit Marcus with unexpected force. When was the last time he'd invited someone over just because he wanted their company? When was the last time anyone had invited him somewhere for the same reason? His social life had become a series of playdate arrangements and school functions, all centered around Emma's needs rather than his own desires. Charlotte seemed equally affected by Emma's words. She blinked rapidly, and Marcus pretended not to notice the way she swiped quickly at the corner of her eye. "You're absolutely right," she told Emma. "Real dinner invitations are the best kind." The drive home was filled with Emma's chatter about dinner preparations and Charlotte's potential reaction to their house. Marcus found himself only half listening, his mind occupied with the sudden reality that he was about to host a dinner for someone who wasn't family or a parent from Emma's school. The thought was both terrifying and oddly exhilarating. Their house sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees, a modest 2-story with a front porch that Marcus had spent countless weekend hours restoring. Emma had insisted on helping with the painting, which meant the white railings bore the evidence of small handprints that Marcus had never had the heart to cover up. "Do you think Charlotte will like our house?" Emma asked as they pulled into the driveway. "I'm sure she will," Marcus replied, though he found himself seeing their home through a stranger's eyes. The lawn needed mowing, and the flower beds that his ex-wife had once tended were now Emma's vegetable garden, a chaotic mix of tomato plants and sunflowers that defied conventional landscaping wisdom but produced impressive results. Inside, The house bore the comfortable chaos of a family focused more on living than impressing. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator and several walls, while Marcus's attempts at child-proofing had evolved into a permanent, decorating scheme of rounded corners and colorful safety gates that Emma had long since outgrown. But he'd never removed. "We need to clean," Emma announced, surveying their domain with critical eyes. "The house is clean," Marcus protested. "It's clean, but not guest clean. There's a difference. Mrs. Patterson explained it to me. Guest clean means no socks on the couch and all the magazines in neat piles." Marcus looked around and realized Emma was right. Their home was comfortable and tidy in the way that worked for daily life, but there were indeed socks on the couch, his socks, and the magazines were scattered across the coffee table in the order he'd read them rather than any aesthetic arrangement. The next 2 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity that would have impressed a professional cleaning crew. Emma appointed herself supervisor, directing Marcus's efforts with the seriousness of a military commander. Pillows were fluffed, surfaces were wiped down, and the dining room table was set with their good dishes, wedding gifts that rarely saw use outside of holidays. "What should I wear?" Marcus asked as they stood back to admire their handiwork. Emma studied him with the same intensity she'd brought to Charlotte's situation at the coffee shop. "Something that shows you're trying but not trying too hard. Like when you take me to school concerts." Marcus wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but he dutifully changed into khakis and a button-down shirt, then changed again when Emma declared. "The first shirt, too job interview why, and the second, too much like you're going to church." "This one," Emma finally announced, holding up a navy sweater that brought out the blue in his eyes. "It makes you look friendly and warm." While Marcus changed clothes for the third time, Emma busied herself with flower arrangements, dandelions picked from their backyard and arranged in a mason jar with the artistic flair of someone who believed more was always better. "Do you think Charlotte likes music?" Emma asked as Marcus started the sauce, browning onions with the careful attention he brought to all his cooking. "I don't know. Why?" "Because if she likes music, we should put some on, but not too loud and nothing sad. Happy music that makes you want to cook together." Marcus found himself wondering what Charlotte's favorite songs were, what she listened to while writing, whether she sang along to the radio in her car. These small mysteries felt both important and completely beyond his knowledge, intimate details that belonged to someone who was still largely a stranger despite the growing familiarity he felt toward her. Emma had claimed responsibility for the salad, standing on her step-stool at the counter and tearing lettuce leaves with the precision of someone following an important recipe. She'd insisted on adding cherry tomatoes cut into flower shapes and cucumber slices arranged in patterns that made sense only to her artistic vision. "Tell me about Charlotte," Marcus said as he stirred the sauce, adding herbs with the measured care of someone who'd learned to cook through necessity and evolved into genuine skill. "What do you want to know?" "I don't know." "What did you two talk about while I was getting the umbrella?" Emma's face lit up with the joy of having important information to share. "She's 28 years old, which is younger than you, but older than me. She writes children's books, but she also does other writing work to pay for groceries. She has a cat named Fitzgerald who's very fat and likes to sit on her keyboard when she's trying to work." Marcus found himself smiling at the image of Charlotte wrestling with a stubborn cat while trying to meet deadlines. "What else?" "She moved here from Wisconsin 6 months ago for a job that didn't work out the way she expected. She doesn't know very many people yet, which is why she looked so sad about being stood up. And she thinks she seemed very nice even, though she was nervous about talking to someone so tall." The last piece of information sent an unexpected warmth through Marcus's chest. Charlotte had noticed him, had formed an opinion about him, had shared that opinion with his daughter. It felt like a small miracle. "She also said you have kind eyes," Emma added matter-of-factly, then paused in her lettuce tearing. "Papa, do you like Charlotte?" The question was innocent enough, but it carried implications that made Marcus choose his words carefully. She seems very nice. I'm glad she's coming to dinner. But do you like her? Like how princes like princesses in movies? Marcus nearly dropped his wooden spoon. Emma, we just met her today, so? Sometimes people know right away when they meet someone special. Like how I knew I wanted to be friends with Sophia on the first day of school, or how Grandma says she knew she wanted to marry Grandpa the minute she saw him at the church social. The comparison to his parents' legendary love story was both touching and terrifying. Marcus had grown up hearing about the instant connection his parents had shared. The way his father had taken one look at his mother across a crowded room and known she was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. It was a romantic notion that had always seemed more like fairy tale than reality, especially after watching his own marriage crumble despite what he'd thought was a solid foundation. Real life is more complicated than movies, Mia, he said gently. I know that, but complicated doesn't mean impossible. And Charlotte seems like she could use someone to take care of her, and you seem like you could use someone to take care of too. The observation was so astute it left Marcus momentarily speechless. Emma had somehow identified the loneliness that he'd been trying to convince himself was contentment. The way he'd filled his days with her needs and left little room for his own. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock, interrupting his contemplation and sending Emma racing toward the front door with excitement that bordered on hysteria. She's here! She's here! Papa, Charlotte's here! Marcus wiped his hands on a kitchen towel and took a deep breath, wondering when he'd become nervous about answering his own front door. Through the window, he could see Charlotte standing on his porch, holding what appeared to be a bottle of wine and looking as nervous as he felt. Emma had already opened the door and was chattering enthusiastically about dinner preparations, ushering Charlotte inside with the hospitality of someone welcoming royalty. Charlotte had changed into jeans and a soft purple sweater that made her eyes look golden in the living room lighting. And Marcus realized Emma had been right about comfortable clothes. She looked relaxed in a way she hadn't at the coffee shop. I brought wine, Charlotte said, holding up the bottle uncertainly. I wasn't sure if, with Emma ... Wine is perfect, Marcus assured her, accepting the bottle and noting that she'd chosen something thoughtful rather than expensive, a gesture that suggested consideration rather than showing off. And I brought something for Emma too, Charlotte added, pulling a small wrapped package from her purse. Emma's eyes went wide with delight. A present? Can I open it now? Charlotte glanced at Marcus, who nodded his approval. Emma tore into the wrapping paper with the enthusiasm she brought to most activities, revealing a small notebook bound in purple leather with a pen that had a tiny flower on top. It's for your observations, Charlotte explained. Like the ones you were making at the coffee shop. You could write down all the interesting things you notice about people. Emma hugged the notebook to her chest as if it were made of precious gems. This is the best present ever. Thank you, Charlotte. And Marcus realized, watching his daughter's joy and Charlotte's pleased smile, that this evening was already shaping up to be something special. Dinner unfolded with surprising ease, as if Charlotte had been joining them for Tuesday evening meals for years rather than hours. Emma had positioned herself as the evening's entertainment director, regaling Charlotte with stories about her school adventures, while simultaneously providing commentary on Marcus's cooking techniques. Papa always tastes the sauce exactly 4 times before he decides it's ready, Emma explained, watching Marcus perform this very ritual. And he cuts the bread so all the pieces are exactly the same size, because he says presentation matters even when it's just family. Just family and honored guests, Marcus corrected, earning a smile from Charlotte that made him temporarily forget what he was doing with the bread knife. The dining room felt different with 3 people around the table. For months, it had been just Marcus and Emma at one corner of the large wooden surface, their voices echoing slightly in the space designed for bigger gatherings. Tonight, with Charlotte seated across from him and Emma providing animated narration between them. The room felt alive in a way it hadn't since the early days of his marriage. Charlotte proved to be an ideal dinner companion, genuinely interested in Emma's stories, appropriately complimentary about the food, and willing to engage in the kind of meandering conversation that emerged when people felt comfortable with each other. She asked thoughtful questions about Emma's school projects and listened with real attention when Marcus explained his work as a software engineer for a company that designed inventory systems for hospitals. "So you help make sure hospitals have what they need when they need it," Charlotte summarized. "That must feel important." Marcus nodded, surprised by how accurately she distilled what he sometimes struggled to explain. "It's not glamorous work, but it matters. When a patient needs something urgently, the system has to work perfectly. Like how Papa's spaghetti sauce has to have exactly the right amount of oregano or the whole dinner tastes wrong." Emma chimed in, making connections with the logic that governed her 6-year-old understanding of the world. Charlotte laughed, a genuine sound that made Marcus realize how quiet their house had become since it was just the two of them. "That's a perfect analogy, Emma. Important things require attention to detail." As they ate, Marcus found himself studying Charlotte's face in the warm light of the dining room chandelier. She had relaxed considerably since arriving, her shoulders losing the protective curve he'd noticed at the coffee shop. When she smiled, which she did frequently during Emma's more dramatic storytelling moments, her entire face transformed, revealing a joy that seemed to surprise even her. "Charlotte," Emma announced between bites of spaghetti, "you should tell us about your book. The one about the little girl who helps lonely people." Charlotte set down her fork, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "It's not very exciting. Just a story about a girl who notices when grown-ups seem sad and tries to help them feel better." "That sounds exactly like Emma," Marcus observed, earning an indignant look from his daughter. "I'm not in a book, Papa. I'm real." "I know you're real, sweetheart. I meant the character sounds like she has the same gift you do, seeing when people need help." Charlotte was nodding thoughtfully. "Actually, that's exactly what inspired the story. I was in a park in Milwaukee, watching this little girl convince two strangers to share a bench because she thought they both looked lonely. She had this amazing ability to see what people needed and just do something about it." Emma straightened in her chair, clearly recognizing a kindred spirit. "Did it work? Did the lonely people become friends?" "I don't know," Charlotte admitted. "I had to leave before I saw how it ended. But I kept thinking about that little girl and wondering what would happen if someone wrote down all the ways she helped people." "You should interview Emma for your book," Marcus suggested, then immediately worried he was overstepping. "I mean, if you want research subjects. She's had a lot of success with matchmaking projects." "Matchmaking projects?" Charlotte raised an eyebrow with amused interest. Emma launched into a detailed account of her previous interventions, including the time she'd convinced the lonely mailman to join their neighborhood book club, and her successful campaign to set up her teacher with the librarian at the public library. "Mrs. Chun and Mr. Williams are getting married next month," Emma announced proudly. "They invited me to be the flower girl because I was the one who told Mrs. Chun that Mr. Williams always smiled differently when she came to pick up books for her class." Charlotte was staring at Emma with something approaching awe. "You really did that?" "You noticed how he smiled and decided to do something about it." "People's faces tell stories," Emma explained with the seriousness of someone sharing professional expertise. Mr. Williams's face told the story of someone who wanted to talk to Mrs. Chun but didn't know how. "So I told Mrs. Chun that he had lots of book recommendations, and I told him that she loved hearing about new books. Then I just waited for them to figure it out." Marcus watched Charlotte processing this information, seeing the exact moment when she realized that Emma's invitation to dinner might not have been as spontaneous as it had seemed. The blush that spread across her cheeks was endearing rather than embarrassed, and when she looked at him across the table, there was a question in her eyes that he wasn't sure how to answer. "Emma," he said carefully, "did you have a plan when you approached Charlotte today?" Emma considered this seriously, twirling spaghetti around her fork with intense concentration. "Not exactly a plan. More like ... a feeling. Charlotte looked sad, and you've been eating too many sad sandwiches, and when I saw you looking at her, your face had the same story as Mr. Williams's face." The silence that followed this revelation was charged with implications that Marcus felt completely unprepared to navigate. Charlotte was looking down at her plate, but he could see the small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "And what story was that?" Charlotte asked softly. "The story of someone who wants to talk to someone else but doesn't know how," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "It's a very common story. Grown-ups get it a lot." Marcus felt heat climbing his neck, but before he could figure out how to respond, Charlotte was looking at him again with those honey-colored eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Is that true?" she asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question that made Marcus forget to be embarrassed. "Maybe," he admitted. "I'm not very good at talking to new people. Emma makes it look easy." "Because Emma doesn't overthink everything," Charlotte said, understanding flickering in her expression. "She just sees what needs to happen and does." "Exactly." Emma beamed, delighted to have her methods understood. "Thinking too much makes everything complicated. Like when Papa spends 10 minutes deciding which shirt to wear to take me to school, when any shirt would work fine." "Some things are worth thinking about," Marcus protested mildly. "Some things," Emma agreed. "But not everything. Like being nice to people who seem lonely, or sharing umbrellas, or inviting someone to dinner because you want them to come. Those things are easy if you don't think too hard about them." Charlotte set down her water glass and studied Emma with renewed interest. "You're very wise for a 6-year-old. Mrs. Patterson says wisdom doesn't come from age. It comes from paying attention to what matters," Emma replied, then added with characteristic honesty, "But I think I'm pretty smart too." The laughter that followed felt natural and unforced, the kind of shared amusement that suggested genuine connection rather than polite dinner conversation. Marcus found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't realized he needed, letting go of the tension he'd been carrying since Charlotte had accepted Emma's invitation. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Charlotte her room, which meant a comprehensive tour that included every stuffed animal, art project, and treasured possession a 6-year-old could accumulate. Marcus followed at a distance, cleaning up the kitchen while listening to Emma's animated explanations and Charlotte's genuinely interested responses. "This is my observation journal that I started keeping after I met Mrs. Chun and Mr. Williams," Emma was saying, holding up a well-worn notebook. "And this is the special pen Charlotte gave me today for my new observation journal. Now I have 2 journals, which means I can observe twice as many people." "That's excellent planning," Charlotte agreed seriously. "What kinds of things do you write in your observation journal?" "Important things about people. Like how Mrs. Henderson at the grocery store always puts the heavy things in the bottom of the bag, which means she thinks about other people's comfort. Or how Mr. Peterson the mailman always stops to pet dogs, even when he's running late, which means he values friendship over schedules." Marcus paused in his dish drying to listen more carefully. He'd known Emma was observant, but he hadn't realized she was conducting such detailed character studies of everyone in their neighborhood. "What about your papa?" Charlotte asked, and Marcus found himself holding his breath. "Papa is easy to observe. Because I see him every day," Emma replied thoughtfully. "He always checks my seatbelt twice before we drive anywhere. And he cuts the crusts off my sandwiches even though I've told him I like crusts now. And he keeps all my artwork, even the messy ones that don't look like anything special." There was a pause, and Marcus could picture Emma settling into her serious expression. the one she wore when sharing particularly important insights. But the most important thing about Papa is that he has a lot of love but nowhere to put it since Mama left. He gives most of it to me, but I'm just one person, and he has enough love for a whole family. That's why his face gets sad sometimes when he thinks I'm not looking. Marcus felt something tight and painful unfold in his chest. He'd thought he'd been protecting Emma from his loneliness, had believed he was successfully maintaining the cheerful facade that single parents were supposed to master. Apparently, his 6-year-old daughter had been conducting her own emotional inventory and reaching conclusions he hadn't wanted her to notice. "That's very observant," Charlotte said gently. "What do you think would help with that sadness?" "Someone else to love," Emma replied with absolute confidence. "Someone who would love him back and help him remember that he's good at taking care of people. Someone who wouldn't mind that he's really tall and shy and checks the weather 3 times before going anywhere." "And you think someone like that exists?" "I know someone like that exists," Emma said, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice. "I met her today at the coffee shop." The silence that followed was so profound that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. He stood frozen in the kitchen, dish towel in hand, wondering if he should intervene or pretend he hadn't heard what amounted to his daughter's romantic consultation session. "Emma," Charlotte said carefully, "matching people is more complicated than you might think. Sometimes people are lonely for different reasons, and sometimes they need time to figure out what they want." "I know that," Emma replied patiently. "But sometimes people know what they want. They're just scared to try to get it. Like how Papa knew he wanted to help you with the umbrella, but he was worried about bothering you. Or how you wanted to come to dinner, but you were worried about being too forward." Marcus set down the dish towel and moved quietly toward the stairs, drawn by a conversation that was reshaping his understanding of his own evening. "How do you know I wanted to come to dinner?" Charlotte asked. "Because when Papa offered the umbrella, you smiled with your eyes before you smiled with your mouth. And when I invited you to dinner, you said yes too fast, like you'd been hoping someone would ask. People don't usually hope for things they don't want." There was another pause, longer this time, and Marcus found himself holding his breath as he waited for Charlotte's response. "You're right," she said finally. "I did want to come to dinner. I wanted it very much." "And do you like Papa? Not just think he's nice, but actually like him?" Marcus closed his eyes, mortified by his daughter's directness but unable to stop listening for the answer. "Yes," Charlotte said quietly. "I like him very much." "Good," Emma replied with satisfaction. "Because he likes you too, even though he's too shy to say so. I can tell because he keeps finding excuses to look at you, and he used his fancy plates for dinner, and he changed his shirt 3 times before you came over." Marcus groaned silently, wondering if there was any detail of his behavior that had escaped his daughter's attention. "He changed his shirt 3 times?" Charlotte asked, and Marcus could hear the laughter in her voice. "Uh-huh. I had to help him pick the right one. The first one was too much like a job interview, and the second one was too much like church. The one he's wearing now makes him look friendly and warm." "It does," Charlotte agreed. "He looks very handsome in it." Marcus felt his face burning with embarrassment and something that might have been pleasure. When was the last time someone had called him handsome? When was the last time he'd cared whether someone found him attractive? So, Emma continued with the persistence of a detective closing a case. "If you like Papa and he likes you, and you both want to spend time together, why don't you just decide to keep doing it? Because adults make things complicated, sweetheart. We worry about all sorts of things that probably don't matter." "Like what?" Like ... What if we try being friends and it doesn't work out? What if we're too different? What if one of us gets hurt?" Emma was quiet for a moment, considering this adult perspective with the seriousness she brought to important problems. "But what if it does work out?" she asked finally. "What if you're exactly right for each other, And you're so worried about what could go wrong that you miss finding out about all the things that could go right. And in that moment, listening to his 6-year-old daughter articulate wisdom that had somehow escaped his 34 years of life experience, Marcus Rodriguez realized that the little girl who had declared, "Papa needs a wife," might have been onto something much more profound than a simple matchmaking scheme. She might have been offering him a chance at happiness he'd been too afraid to reach for on his own. Marcus stood at the bottom of the stairs, wrestling with the decision of whether to retreat to the kitchen or announce his presence. The choice was made for him when Emma's voice carried down the hallway with crystal clarity. "Papa, come here. Charlotte wants to see my butterfly collection." There was no graceful way to pretend he hadn't been listening, so Marcus climbed the stairs with the resigned air of someone who'd been caught in the act of accidental eavesdropping. When he appeared in Emma's doorway, Charlotte's cheeks were flushed pink, but her smile was warm rather than embarrassed. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the framed butterfly specimens that covered one wall of Emma's room. "Emma was telling me about how you helped her start this collection." Marcus stepped into the room, grateful for the neutral territory that his daughter's hobby provided. She found a monarch wing in the backyard last spring and wanted to know everything about butterflies. It seemed like a better alternative to her previous plan of catching live ones and keeping them in jars. "We learned that butterflies need to be free to be beautiful," Emma explained seriously. "But we can still appreciate their beauty by learning about them and keeping pictures and specimens when we find them naturally." Charlotte moved closer to examine the display, genuinely interested in Emma's careful labeling and artistic arrangement. "This is incredible work, Emma. You know the scientific names and everything. Papa helped me research them. He says if you're going to do something, you should do it right. We have 17 different species now, and we're hoping to find a painted lady next spring." "Your papa seems very good at encouraging your interests," Charlotte observed, glancing at Marcus with an expression that made him feel simultaneously proud and self-conscious. "He's the best at that," Emma agreed. "When I wanted to learn piano, he found a teacher and practiced with me every day, even though he doesn't know how to play. When I decided I wanted to be a veterinarian, he bought me books about animals, and we visited 3 different animal shelters so I could ask questions." "And when you decided you wanted to learn French?" Marcus prompted, enjoying the way Charlotte's eyebrows rose with interest. "He downloaded an app and we practiced together during breakfast," Emma finished triumphantly. "Bonjour, Charlotte." "Comment allez-vous?" "Bonjour, Emma." "Je vais bien, merci," Charlotte replied with what sounded like excellent pronunciation, earning a delighted gasp from Emma. "You speak French?" "Papa, she speaks French. I studied it in college," Charlotte explained. "I always thought it was a beautiful language." Emma was practically vibrating with excitement at this discovery. "Papa, this is perfect. You can practice with Charlotte instead of the app lady who talks too fast." Marcus felt that familiar heat creeping up his neck. "I'm sure Charlotte has better things to do than listen to my terrible French pronunciation." "Actually," Charlotte said with a smile that suggested she was enjoying his discomfort, "I think it's wonderful that you're learning." Alongside Emma, most parents would just find a tutor and call it done. There was something in her tone that made Marcus look at her more closely. Behind the compliment, he caught a glimpse of something that looked like longing, as if she were remembering parents who had taken the tutor route rather than the participation route. Emma, meanwhile, had moved on to showing Charlotte her art supplies, a comprehensive collection that took up most of her desk and part of the floor. "Papa says I have enough supplies to open my own art store, but I told him you can never have too many ways to make beautiful things." "That's very wise," Charlotte agreed, examining Emma's latest project, a watercolor painting of their backyard garden. "This is lovely, Emma. You have a real eye for color." "Papa hung all my artwork downstairs, even the ones from when I was little and couldn't draw hands properly." He says every piece of art tells a story about who I was when I made it. Charlotte glanced at Marcus with an expression that was becoming increasingly warm. Your papa says a lot of wise things. He reads a lot of books about being a good parent. Emma confided. Sometimes I find him reading them at night when he thinks I'm asleep. He worries that he's not doing everything right. Marcus wanted to disappear through the floor. Apparently, his daughter had been conducting surveillance operations. That would impress a professional spy. Emma, maybe Charlotte doesn't need to know about my reading habits. But it's a good thing, Emma protested. It shows you care about being the best papa you can be. Charlotte, don't you think that's important? Charlotte was looking at him with an expression that made his breath catch. I think it's one of the most important things in the world, she said quietly. The moment stretched between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond parenting philosophies. Marcus found himself lost in those honey-colored eyes, wondering. When this evening had shifted from polite dinner conversation to something that felt like the beginning of something significant, Emma, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around her, had moved on to her bookshelf. Charlotte, since you write children's books, you should see my library. Papa reads to me every night, and we keep all the books I really love. The tour of Emma's literary collection revealed an impressive range, from classic picture books to early chapter books that spoke to her advanced reading level. Charlotte examined each recommendation with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about Emma's favorites and sharing her own childhood reading memories. I used to hide under my covers with a flashlight to keep reading after bedtime, Charlotte admitted. My parents thought I was asleep, but I was usually 3 chapters ahead of where I was supposed to be. Papa lets me do that sometimes, Emma said with a conspiratorial whisper. He pretends not to notice the light under my door, but he always comes to check on me after exactly 15 minutes to make sure I'm not staying up too late. Marcus caught Charlotte's amused glance and shrugged. 15 minutes of secret reading never hurt anyone. And it's better than fighting about bedtime. Every night. You're very understanding, Charlotte observed. I remember what it was like to be a kid who loved books. My mother used to find me reading with a flashlight too. She'd confiscate the flashlight but leave the book, which I thought was a fair compromise. They had migrated back downstairs during the literary discussion, settling in the living room where the soft lamp lighting created an atmosphere that felt both intimate and comfortable. Emma had claimed her favorite spot on the floor, surrounded by the art supplies she'd brought down to show Charlotte, while Marcus and Charlotte found themselves on opposite ends of the couch, close enough to continue their conversation without shouting over Emma's running commentary. Can I ask you something? Charlotte said, her voice carrying a note of hesitation that suggested the question was more personal than their previous exchanges. Of course. Emma mentioned that her mother left. I don't want to pry, but was it difficult becoming a single parent so suddenly? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share. The story of his marriage's end wasn't something he discussed often, partly because it still carried the sting of failure and partly because he'd never found a way to explain it that didn't sound bitter or self-pitying. It was terrifying, he said finally. Not just the practical aspects, though those were overwhelming enough, but the emotional weight of being solely responsible for another person's happiness and well-being. Some days I felt completely out of my depth. Charlotte nodded as if she understood something about feeling overwhelmed by responsibility. What helped you get through it? Emma, mostly. She was only 2 when her mother left, so she didn't understand what was happening. But she also didn't know that our new normal wasn't supposed to be normal. She just adapted to having pancakes for dinner sometimes and helping me figure out how to braid her hair through YouTube tutorials. You learned to braid hair from YouTube? Charlotte's smile was soft and admiring, among other things. Makeup for her dress-up games, nail polish application, the proper way to host a tea party. For stuffed animals. YouTube University has a very comprehensive curriculum in emergency parenting skills. Emma looked up from her drawing, clearly pleased to hear her father sharing these memories. Papa got really good at being both parents. He can do ponytails and fix scraped knees and make blanket forts and sing lullabies. The lullabies are questionable, Marcus admitted. I have a terrible singing voice. But you sing them anyway, Charlotte said, and there was something in her voice that suggested. This detail mattered to her. She deserves someone who tries, even if the results aren't perfect. The conversation was interrupted by Emma's announcement that she had finished her drawing. She held up a piece of paper that showed 3 stick figures standing under what appeared to be a massive umbrella with rain falling around them and flowers scattered in the background. It's us from today, she announced proudly. Papa, you and me under the big umbrella. I added flowers because Charlotte likes to draw flowers, and I made the rain purple because regular rain is boring. Charlotte studied the drawing with the seriousness she brought to all of Emma's artistic endeavors. It's beautiful, Emma. I love how you captured that moment. It was an important moment, Emma said matter-of-factly. Important moments should be remembered. Can you write your name on it so I don't forget who you are if we don't see you for a while? The request was innocent enough, but it carried an undercurrent of anxiety that made Marcus's chest tighten. Emma had learned, far too young, that people could disappear from her life without warning. Her request for Charlotte's signature wasn't just about the drawing. It was about creating something permanent in case this new person proved as temporary as the others. Charlotte seemed to understand the weight of the request. She accepted the crayon Emma offered and carefully wrote Charlotte Walsh in neat script at the bottom of the page, then added a small flower next to her name. There, she said, handing the drawing back. Now it's official. Emma beamed, holding the paper as if it were a treasured document. I'm going to put it on my bedroom wall next to my butterfly collection. As the evening continued, Marcus found himself marveling at how naturally Charlotte fit into their routine. She didn't try to take over or impose her own preferences. Instead, she followed Emma's lead and supported the rhythms they'd established, while adding her own gentle presence to the mix. When Emma inevitably began showing signs of tiredness, rubbing her eyes and becoming increasingly giggly, Charlotte didn't overstay her welcome or resist the hint that the evening was winding down. Instead, she helped clean up the art supplies and listened patiently as Emma extracted promises about future visits. Will you come back soon? Emma asked as they gathered at the front door. I'd like that very much, Charlotte replied, then looked at Marcus. If your papa thinks that would be okay. More than okay, Marcus said, surprising himself with how quickly the words came. You're welcome here any time. Emma clapped her hands together. Perfect. Charlotte, next time you should come on a weekend so we can show you our pancake routine and take you to the farmer's market. Papa makes friends with all the vegetable vendors, and Mrs. Kim always gives me extra strawberries. That sounds wonderful, Charlotte agreed, pulling on her jacket. I'll look forward to it. The goodbye at the door felt both natural and reluctant, as if none of them quite wanted the evening to end, but all understood that it should. Emma hugged Charlotte with the enthusiasm she usually reserved for favored relatives, while Marcus found himself in the awkward position of not knowing whether a handshake, a hug, or simply waving goodbye was the appropriate farewell. Charlotte solved the dilemma by stepping forward and giving him a brief, warm hug that lasted just long enough to leave him slightly breathless and definitely hoping for a repeat performance. Thank you, she said as she stepped back. Both of you. This was exactly what I needed tonight. Thank you for coming, Marcus replied. For saying yes when you could have said no. For being brave enough to accept an invitation from strangers. Emma added solemnly. Charlotte laughed, the sound carrying into the night air as she walked toward her car. Best decision I've made in a long time. As they watched her drive away, Emma slipped her hand into Marcus's and squeezed gently. "Papa?" she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose careful plans had worked exactly as intended. "Yes, Mia? I think Charlotte is going to be very good for us." And standing there in their doorway, watching the taillights disappear around the corner, Marcus Rodriguez found himself thinking that his 6-year-old daughter might just be the wisest person he'd ever met. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the same coffee shop where everything had started, but this time he wasn't nervous about approaching the woman in the corner booth. This time, Charlotte looked up with a smile that reached her eyes the moment she saw him and Emma enter. And this time, there was a reserved sign on the table that read, "Rodriguez Family +1. You're late," Charlotte called out with mock severity, as they shook off their coats. "I was beginning to think you'd found a better coffee shop." "Never," Emma declared, racing over to give Charlotte the hug that had become their standard greeting. "We're late because Papa spent 20 minutes looking for his keys, and then we remembered they were in yesterday's jacket pocket, again." "I don't spend 20 minutes looking for my keys," Marcus protested, settling into the chair across from Charlotte with a familiarity that still surprised him. 19 minutes and 43 seconds, Emma corrected with the precision of someone who had been timing these incidents. "I counted." The easy banter was a far cry from their first awkward encounter. In the weeks since that rainy Tuesday dinner, Charlotte had become a regular fixture in their lives, not invasively, but naturally, like a puzzle piece they hadn't realized was missing until it clicked into place. She'd kept her promise about the weekend farmer's market, charming Mrs. Kim with her genuine interest in heirloom tomatoes, and helping Emma select the perfect pumpkin for carving. She'd attended Emma's school art show, where she'd spent 20 minutes discussing technique with Emma's teacher while Marcus beamed with pride at having someone else appreciate his daughter's talent. Most significantly, she'd begun staying for bedtime stories on the nights she joined them for dinner, sitting in the reading chair while Marcus and Emma shared the couch, adding voices for different characters and discussing plot developments with the seriousness that good literature deserved. "How's the book coming?" Marcus asked as Rosie delivered their usual orders without being asked a development that had delighted Emma to no end. "Wonderfully," Charlotte replied, pulling out her notebook to show them her latest sketches. "I've been incorporating some real-life research into the story." The drawing showed a little girl with dark curls remarkably similar to Emma's, helping various adults navigate social situations with the kind of wisdom that only children seem to possess. There was a scene of her convincing 2 shy people to share an umbrella, another of her orchestrating a dinner invitation, and a third showing her explaining the importance of butterfly pancakes to a confused adult. "Is that supposed to be me?" Emma asked, studying the illustrations with intense curiosity. "It's inspired by you," Charlotte clarified. "But the character is named Luna, and she lives in a town called Willowbrook, and her father is a baker instead of a software engineer." "But she has the same gift I do," Emma observed with satisfaction. "The gift of seeing what people need and helping them get it." "Exactly the same gift," Charlotte confirmed. "Though in the story, she helps a shy librarian and a gentle baker find each other." Marcus felt heat creep up his neck as he caught the obvious parallels. "And how does that story end?" Charlotte's smile was soft and slightly mischievous. "I'm still working on that part. I want to make sure I get the ending right." Emma had moved on to examining the other sketches, her artistic eye catching details that the adults had missed. "Charlotte, you drew Luna's papa really tall, just like my papa, and you gave the librarian honey-colored eyes." "Did I?" Charlotte asked with exaggerated innocence. "I hadn't noticed." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Patterson, their 70-something neighbor, approached their table with the determined stride of someone on an important mission. "Marcus Rodriguez," she announced, as if calling a formal meeting to order. "I need to speak with you." Marcus rose politely, wondering what neighborhood emergency required his immediate attention. Mrs. Patterson had strong opinions about everything from lawn care to proper sidewalk snow removal, and she wasn't shy about sharing them. "Mrs. Patterson, this is our friend Charlotte Walsh," he said, hoping to deflect whatever crisis was brewing. "Charlotte, this is Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor." Mrs. Patterson studied Charlotte with the sharp eyes of someone conducting an inspection. "So you're the young woman who's been making my neighbor smile again." Charlotte blushed, but her voice was steady when she replied, "I hope so. He's been making me smile too." "Good," Mrs. Patterson said with a decisive nod. "It's about time. Emma, dear, you did excellent work." Emma preened under the praise. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I used all the techniques you taught me about observing people and understanding what they need." Marcus stared at his daughter with growing suspicion. "What techniques?" "Mrs. Patterson has been teaching me about human nature," Emma explained matter-of-factly. "She says I have natural talent, but talent needs education to be really effective." "You've been taking matchmaking lessons from Mrs. Patterson?" Marcus asked, incredulous. "Not matchmaking, Mrs. Patterson," corrected with the dignity of someone whose methods were being questioned. "Social observation and intervention strategies. The child has remarkable instincts, but instincts without knowledge are merely luck." Charlotte was trying very hard not to laugh. "So Emma's assistance today wasn't entirely spontaneous?" "The feelings were spontaneous," Emma said seriously. "But Mrs. Patterson helped me understand how to act on them effectively. She taught me about timing and approach strategies and how to read body language." Marcus sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the realization that his 6-year-old daughter had been operating with professional consultation. "Mrs. Patterson, you turned my daughter into a tiny relationship counselor." "I prefer social facilitator," Mrs. Patterson replied with dignity. "And she was already doing the work. I simply provided theoretical framework and tactical guidance. She taught me that when two shy people like each other, they need someone brave enough to push them together." Emma added helpfully. "And she explained that sometimes grown-ups need permission to want things they're afraid to ask for." Charlotte reached across the table to squeeze Marcus's hand, a gesture that had become natural over the past 3 weeks. "For what it's worth, I'm grateful for both the instincts and the education." Mrs. Patterson beamed with satisfaction. "Excellent results all around. Now I have something to discuss with you, Marcus. Emma, why don't you show Charlotte your new observation journal? Entries while I speak with your father?" Emma dutifully pulled out the purple leather notebook Charlotte had given her, now filled with detailed observations about everyone from their mail carrier to the barista at Rosie's. Charlotte listened with genuine interest as Emma explained her latest theories about human behavior, leaving Marcus to face Mrs. Patterson's scrutiny alone. "That young woman is good for you," Mrs. Patterson announced without preamble. "I'm aware of that, Mrs. Patterson. Are you?" "Because you're moving very slowly for someone who's found exactly what he needs." Marcus glanced toward Charlotte, who was laughing at something Emma had written about the grocery store manager's secret fondness for romantic comedies. "We're taking things at a comfortable pace." "Comfortable for whom?" "You're both clearly smitten. Emma adores her, and anyone with eyes can see that Charlotte fits into your family like she was designed for it. What exactly are you waiting for?" The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard. What was he waiting for? Charlotte had become an integral part of their lives, someone whose absence was noticed and whose presence was celebrated. Emma had taken to asking when Charlotte was coming over with the same enthusiasm she once reserved for Christmas morning anticipation. "I don't want to rush things," he said finally. "Emma's been through enough disruption in her life." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "Marcus, that child orchestrated this entire relationship because she could see that you needed Charlotte as much as Charlotte needed you. She's not worried about disruption. She's worried about you eating sad sandwiches for the rest of your life." "She told you about the sad sandwiches?" She tells me about everything. She's concerned about your long-term nutritional and emotional well-being. She wants you to be happy, and she's identified Charlotte as the solution to your happiness. Deficit. Marcus watched Emma showing Charlotte the page where she'd analyzed the romantic potential between their librarian and the pet store owner, complete with diagrams and strategic recommendations. His daughter's dedication to improving other people's lives was both admirable and slightly terrifying. What if it doesn't work out? He asked quietly. What if we try to be more than friends and it ruins what we have? Mrs. Patterson studied him with the patience of someone who had spent decades observing human nature. What if it does work out? What if you're both so focused on protecting yourselves from potential hurt that you miss out on actual happiness? The question echoed Emma's words from that first dinner, when she'd asked Charlotte why adults were so worried about what could go wrong that they missed what could go right. It seemed his daughter had inherited Mrs. Patterson's philosophy along with her tactical training. Marcus, Mrs. Patterson continued more gently, I've watched you for 8 months now, trying to be everything Emma needs while ignoring everything you need. That child loves you enough to take action on your behalf. The least you can do is be brave enough to let her efforts succeed. Before Marcus could respond, Emma's voice carried across their conversation with the clarity of someone making an important announcement. Charlotte, would you like to be my papa's girlfriend officially? Because you already do everything girlfriends do, like make him smile and help with cooking and listen to his stories about work. You just haven't made it official yet. The coffee shop seemed to go quiet around their table. Charlotte's cheeks turned pink, but she didn't look embarrassed, she looked hopeful. Emma was watching both adults with the intense interest of someone whose carefully laid plans were finally reaching their climax. Marcus felt every eye in the coffee shop turned toward their table, but for once he didn't care about being the center of attention. He was looking at Charlotte, seeing the way she bit her lower lip nervously while waiting for his response to Emma's characteristically direct question. Emma, he said carefully, that's not exactly how these things work. Why not? Emma asked, with genuine curiosity. You like each other. You spend time together. You make each other happy. Isn't that what boyfriends and girlfriends do? It's more complicated than that, Marcus began, then stopped as he realized he couldn't actually explain why it was more complicated. Emma had accurately described their relationship, and her question was perfectly reasonable from any perspective. That prioritized honesty over social convention. Charlotte cleared her throat softly. Actually, Emma, I think that's exactly how these things should work. When people care about each other and enjoy spending time together, they should be honest about their feelings. She turned to look at Marcus directly, and he saw courage in her honey-colored eyes that made his breath catch. Marcus, I would very much like to be your girlfriend officially. If you'd like that too. The moment stretched between them, loaded with possibility and the weight of Emma's satisfied expression. Marcus realized that this was what Mrs. Patterson had been talking about, the moment when courage mattered more than caution, when the risk of happiness outweighed the fear of hurt. Yes, he said simply, I would like that very much. Emma clapped, her hands together with the satisfaction of someone whose long-term project had finally reached successful completion. Perfect. Now you can hold hands in public, and Papa doesn't have to pretend he's not looking at you all the time. Charlotte laughed, reaching across the table to take Marcus's hand in hers. I was wondering when he was going to stop being so subtle about that. Papa isn't very good at subtle, Emma confided. But he's very good at other things, like making butterfly pancakes and giving hugs and loving people with his whole heart. As if summoned by the declaration, Rosie appeared at their table with a plate of heart-shaped cookies that definitely hadn't been on their original order. On the house, she announced with a knowing smile. For the couple who've been dancing around each other for 3 weeks. We haven't been dancing around each other, Marcus protested weakly. Honey, you've been circling each other like shy birds. Rosie replied with the authority of someone who had witnessed the entire courtship from behind the counter. "That little girl of yours deserves credit for finally getting you two to the point." Emma beamed under the praise, clearly delighted to have her matchmaking skills recognized by yet another adult. "Mrs. Patterson says I should consider social work as a career option." "Mrs. Patterson might be onto something," Charlotte agreed, squeezing Marcus's hand gently. "You have a real gift for bringing people together." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same coffee shop, but this time the occasion was different. Charlotte's children's book, Luna and the Lonely Hearts Club, had been published to enthusiastic reviews, and Rosie had insisted on hosting a launch party, complete with butterfly-shaped cookies and decorations that Emma had helped design. The book had become a local sensation, partly because residents of their neighborhood kept recognizing themselves in Charlotte's gentle portrayals of community connection. Mrs. Kim from the farmer's market had been particularly delighted to discover that Luna's wise vegetable vendor bore a striking resemblance to her own approach to customer relationships. Emma sat at a special table, signing copies of the book alongside Charlotte with the seriousness of someone who understood her role as inspiration and co-creator. She'd insisted on writing personal messages in each book, sharing observations about the real-life basis for Luna's adventures. "The best part about this story," Emma announced to a customer who had asked about the book's origins, "is that it really happened. Well, most of it. The umbrella part and the dinner invitation and the butterfly pancakes are all real. Charlotte just changed the names and added a few extra details to make it more interesting." Marcus watched from behind the counter, where he was helping Rosie manage the crowd that had gathered to celebrate Charlotte's success. He wore an engagement ring now, a simple band that Charlotte had chosen because she said it reminded her of the way he'd held the umbrella that first day, steady and protective and unshakable. Their engagement had been as unconventional as their courtship, announced by Emma during a family dinner when she'd simply stated, "I think you two should get married so Charlotte can be my official stepmom and we can be a real family forever." Neither Marcus nor Charlotte had been able to argue with the logic, especially since they'd both been thinking the same thing. "Papa," Emma called from her signing table, "come tell Mrs. Henderson about how you learned to braid hair from YouTube." Marcus obligingly shared the story that had become part of their family mythology, earning laughter from the assembled crowd and a fond smile from Charlotte. She'd heard all his parenting war stories by now, and instead of being intimidated by the evidence of his learning curve, she'd been charmed by his willingness to figure things out as he went along. The afternoon wound down with promises of future book readings and a commitment from Rosie to keep Luna and the Lonely Hearts Club prominently displayed near the register. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus, Charlotte, and Emma found themselves alone at their original table, surrounded by the remnants of a successful celebration. "So," Charlotte said, leaning back in her chair with a satisfied expression, "how does it feel to be famous, Emma?" "Good," Emma replied thoughtfully, "but also kind of funny because I didn't really do anything special. I just paid attention to what people needed and tried to help them get it. That's exactly what makes it special," Marcus said, pulling his daughter onto his lap for the kind of hug that had become their celebration ritual. "Not everyone pays that kind of attention to other people. Mrs. Patterson says it's a gift, but gifts are only valuable if you use them to help people," Emma said with the wisdom that continued to amaze the adults in her life. Charlotte reached across the table to touch Marcus's hand, the gesture automatic now after months of building a relationship based on small moments of connection. "What do you think, Papa? Ready for the next adventure?" Marcus looked around the coffee shop where his life had changed direction on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, then at his daughter who had orchestrated that change with the kind of fearless love that made everything possible, and finally at the woman who had said yes to a dinner invitation from strangers and turned their family of 2 into a family of 3. "With you two planning the adventures?" he said, lifting Emma's hand to kiss her knuckles before reaching for Charlotte's. "I'm ready for anything." Emma giggled, settling more comfortably in her father's lap while maintaining her hold on Charlotte's other hand. "Good, because Mrs. Patterson says the couple down the street could use some help, and I've been observing them for weeks. I think they're perfect for each other, but they're both too shy to make the first move." Charlotte and Marcus exchanged a look of amused resignation above Emma's head. "Here we go again," Marcus murmured. "Here we go again," Charlotte agreed with a laugh, and as the three of them sat together in the coffee shop where everything had started, planning their next intervention in the name of love, Marcus Rodriguez realized that sometimes the most important declarations came from the smallest voices, and sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let a 6-year-old girl push you toward exactly what you needed. After all, Papa had needed a wife, and Emma had made sure he found so much more than that. He'd found a family 1 year later, the morning of what Emma had declared the most important day in Rodriguez family history dawned bright and clear, with the kind of September sunshine that made even the most nervous groom feel like the universe was conspiring in his favor. Marcus stood in front of his bedroom mirror, fumbling with his tie for the 4th time, while Emma provided commentary from her perch on his bed. She wore a pale yellow dress that she'd insisted matched the sunflowers in Charlotte's bouquet, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that Mrs. Patterson had spent an hour perfecting. "Papa, you're making the tie crooked again," Emma observed with the patience of someone who had been supervising his formal wear preparation for 30 minutes. "Remember what Charlotte taught you, the wide part goes over the narrow part, then under, then through the loop." "I know how to tie." "A tie," Marcus protested, though his shaking hands were making it considerably more difficult than usual. "You know how to tie a regular tie," Emma corrected. "Wedding ties are different because they have to be perfect for photographs, and they have to stay perfect for dancing and cake cutting, and all the other important wedding activities." Marcus paused in his tie wrestling to look at his daughter with amazement. At 7 years old, Emma had become the family's unofficial wedding coordinator, keeping track of details that the actual adults had forgotten and ensuring that everyone understood their roles in what she considered the most elaborate performance she'd ever directed. "How do you know so much about weddings?" he asked. "Research," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "After you and Charlotte got engaged, I checked out 17 books about weddings from the library and watched 12 movies with wedding scenes." Mrs. Patterson also shared her expertise from attending 43 weddings over the years. 43 weddings? She keeps a list, with ratings based on food quality, decorations, and whether the couple looked genuinely happy or just nervous. She gave our wedding an advance rating of 9 out of 10. What would make it a 10 out of 10? Emma considered this seriously. If Mr. Peterson, the mailman, dances with Mrs. Kim from the farmer's market. I've been working on that introduction for months, and today seems like the perfect opportunity for a romantic breakthrough. Marcus finished his tie successfully this time and turned to face his daughter. "Emma, you know this is my wedding day, right? Mine and Charlotte's? You don't have to manage everyone else's love life today. Papa, a good matchmaker never takes a day off," Emma explained with the wisdom of someone who had read extensively on the subject. "Besides, Charlotte agrees with me about Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Kim. She says they're both lonely, and they both love gardening, and they both have very kind hearts. It's practically a perfect match." The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Marcus could see Charlotte's sister arriving with the rest of the bridal party, which meant they had exactly 30 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin in their backyard, the backyard that had been transformed overnight into something that looked like a fairy tale garden, complete with white chairs arranged in perfect rows, an archway covered in sunflowers and ivy, and string lights that would create magic when the sun began to set. Emma had insisted on helping with every detail, From the placement of the guest book table to the arrangement of the flower petals that would mark Charlotte's path down the makeshift aisle. "Are you nervous, Papa?" Emma asked, studying his face. With the intensity she brought to all her people-reading activities, Marcus considered the question honestly. "A little. But it's good to be nervous. The kind of nervousness you get when something wonderful is about to happen. Like Christmas morning nervous or first day of school nervous. Like the day you were born nervous," Marcus said, sitting on the bed beside her. "Scared and excited and grateful all at the same time," Emma nodded sagely. "That's the right kind of nervousness for a wedding day. Mrs. Patterson says if you're not at least a little nervous on your wedding day, you're either not paying attention or you're marrying the wrong person." A knock on the bedroom door prevented Marcus from asking what other matrimonial wisdom Mrs. Patterson had shared. Charlotte's voice carried through the wood with barely contained excitement. "Can I come in? I know it's bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony, but I have something important to tell you." Emma bounced off the bed and opened the door, revealing Charlotte in her wedding dress, a simple but elegant design that managed to be both sophisticated and perfect for a backyard ceremony. Her hair was swept up with small flowers tucked among the curls, and she was holding a manila envelope with barely contained excitement. "You look beautiful," Marcus said, forgetting about superstitions as he took in the sight of his bride-to-be. "Thank you, but that's not why I'm here," Charlotte said, though her smile suggested she appreciated the compliment. "I just got a phone call from my editor. They want to make Luna and the Lonely Hearts Club into a series." Emma's shriek of excitement could probably be heard 3 blocks away. A series like multiple books about Luna? 5 books, Charlotte confirmed, grinning as Emma began jumping up and down with joy. They want Luna to help different people in each book, and they want to expand her world to include more family members and friends. Marcus felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with his own accomplishments. Charlotte's book had become more successful than any of them had dared to hope, resonating with readers who recognized the truth in Luna's simple approach to human connection. "Does this mean Luna gets a little brother or sister in the new books?" Emma asked with the practical interest of someone who understood the importance of family dynamics in storytelling. "Actually," Charlotte said, glancing at Marcus with an expression that made his heart skip, "I was thinking Luna might get a new mom in the second book. Someone who helps her papa realize that families can grow in beautiful ways." The implications of that statement hit Marcus like a gentle wave of possibility. They'd talked about having more children someday, but hearing Charlotte reference it in the context of her Luna stories made it feel more real, more intentional. "And maybe," Emma added with the strategic thinking that had made her such an effective matchmaker, "in the third book, Luna could get a baby brother or sister, so she can teach them about helping people find love." Charlotte laughed, pulling Emma into a hug that was careful not to wrinkle either of their dresses. "One book at a time, sweetheart, but I like the way you think." Another knock interrupted their impromptu planning session, this time accompanied by the voice of Charlotte's sister announcing that the photographer was ready for pre-ceremony pictures, and the guests were beginning to arrive. The next hour passed in a blur of activity that Emma orchestrated with the efficiency of a seasoned event coordinator. She ensured that Marcus's boutonniere was straight, that Charlotte's veil was arranged perfectly, and that the ring bearer Charlotte's 4-year-old nephew understood his very important job of walking slowly and not dropping the rings. "Remember," Emma instructed the little boy with the seriousness of someone passing on crucial information, "walk like you're carrying something very precious, because you are. Those rings represent Papa and Charlotte's promise to love each other forever." The ceremony itself was everything Emma had planned and more. Marcus stood beneath the sunflower arch, watching Charlotte walk down the petal-strewn path with her father, and felt the kind of overwhelming gratitude that made his chest tight with emotion. 2 years ago, he'd been a lonely single father eating sad sandwiches and worrying about whether he was enough for his daughter. Now he was surrounded by friends and family, about to marry a woman who had brought light into corners of his life he hadn't even realized were dark. Emma served as Charlotte's maid of honor, a role she took extremely seriously. She held Charlotte's bouquet during the vow exchange, wiped away tears that threatened to smudge makeup, and beamed with pride as her careful matchmaking efforts reached their ultimate conclusion. The vows themselves were a perfect blend of traditional promises and personal touches that reflected their unique journey. Marcus spoke about learning to be brave enough to accept love when it was offered, while Charlotte promised to always say yes to dinner invitations from beautiful families who needed someone to share their butterfly pancakes. When the efficient pronounced them husband and wife, Emma cheered louder than anyone else in the assembled crowd, her voice carrying across the backyard with pure joy. The kiss that sealed their marriage was accompanied by applause, laughter, and Emma's shouted reminder that this is the part where everyone cries happy tears. The reception continued in the same backyard, with tables arranged around the garden, and fairy lights creating magic as the sun began to set. Emma had insisted on a special table for the wedding party that allowed her to observe all the guests and identify potential romantic connections among the assembled friends and family. "Papa," she whispered during the salad course, "did you see how Mr. Peterson helped Mrs. Kim find her seat?" And she laughed at his joke about the weather. "I think my plan is working." Marcus followed her gaze to see their mail carrier deep in conversation with the farmer's market vendor, both of them looking more animated than he'd ever seen them. "Emma, did you arrange their seating on purpose?" "Obviously," Emma replied with the satisfaction of someone whose strategy was yielding results. "I also made sure they both knew about the open bar and the fact that the band plays really good dancing music. Sometimes people need multiple opportunities to connect." Charlotte, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amusement, leaned over to whisper in Emma's ear, "What about Mrs. Patterson? Did you find her a match too?" Emma giggled, pointing toward the head table where Mrs. Patterson was engaged in animated conversation with Charlotte's grandfather, a retired literature professor who shared her passion for gardening and strong opinions about proper social etiquette. "They've been talking about roses and Shakespeare for 20 minutes, Emma reported. "Mrs. Patterson says she's too old for romance, but she keeps smiling and touching her hair when he talks. I think she likes him but doesn't want to admit it." The evening progressed with the kind of joyful chaos that marked the best celebrations. The father-daughter dance brought tears to more eyes than just Marcus's, especially when Emma whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Now Charlotte gets to dance with her new papa too." The mother-daughter dance that followed was Emma's idea, a tradition she'd invented specifically for their blended family. Charlotte had worried about overstepping boundaries, but Emma had been insistent that new families needed new traditions, and this one was too important to skip. As they swayed together to a song that Emma had helped choose, Charlotte whispered, "Thank you for sharing your papa with me." "Thank you for making him stop eating sad sandwiches," Emma whispered back, making Charlotte laugh so hard she nearly tripped over her wedding dress. The cake-cutting ceremony revealed yet another of Emma's strategic interventions. She'd convinced the baker to create a 3-tiered design that told the story of their meeting, the bottom layer decorated with umbrella patterns, the middle layer featuring butterflies, and the top layer adorned with tiny figures of a tall man, a small woman, and a little girl holding hands. "It's our whole story in cake form," Emma announced proudly as the photographer captured their joint cake-cutting moment. "So even when we eat it, we'll remember how we became a family." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Marcus found himself standing in the garden with Charlotte and Emma, surrounded by the remnants of their perfect day. Emma's elaborate hairstyle had devolved into something resembling a bird's nest. Her yellow dress was stained with cake frosting and grass stains, and she was practically vibrating with exhaustion and lingering excitement. "Best wedding ever," she declared, settling onto the garden bench between her father and new stepmother. "Though I think we should have another one next year, just to see if we can make it even better." "One wedding is enough, Mia," Marcus said, pulling her close for the kind of hug that said more than words could manage. "But what about when Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Kim get engaged? And Mrs. Patterson and Professor Williams? And the couple down the street that I've been working on? We're going to need lots of weddings if my business keeps growing." Charlotte laughed, adjusting Emma's crooked flower crown with gentle fingers. "Your business?" "Rodriguez Family Matchmaking Services," Emma announced with the confidence of someone who had given this considerable thought. "We're really good at bringing people together, and there are lots of lonely people who could use our help. I think we should make it official." Marcus and Charlotte exchanged a look over Emma's head, recognizing the birth of yet another ambitious Emma project. "What do you think, Mrs. Rodriguez?" Marcus asked, still marveling at the newness of Charlotte's married name. "Ready to join the family business?" Charlotte kissed the top of Emma's head, then reached across to kiss Marcus with the promise of all their tomorrows ahead. "With you two as partners, I'm ready for anything." And as they sat together in their garden, planning their future as a family of professional love facilitators, Marcus Rodriguez realized that sometimes the most important declarations really did come from the smallest voices. Emma had declared that Papa needed a wife, and in doing so, she'd created something none of them had dared to imagine. She'd created a love story that would inspire books, heal lonely hearts, and prove that the bravest thing anyone could do was trust a 6-year-old with an umbrella and an unshakable belief in the power of butterfly pancakes to change the world. After all, every great love story needed someone brave enough to make the first move. Sometimes that someone just happened to be 7 years old and convinced that grown-ups needed more help than they were willing to admit. But in the Rodriguez family, that was perfectly normal. And perfectly wonderful. 5 years after that rainy Tuesday afternoon at Rosie's Coffee Corner, 12-year-old Emma Rodriguez Walsh stood at the podium of the Chicago Children's Literature Conference, adjusting her microphone with the confidence of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of public speaking. The auditorium was packed with authors, educators, and publishing professionals who had come to hear the young woman whose real life story had inspired one of the most beloved children's book series of the decade. The Luna and the Lonely Hearts Club books had sold over 2 million copies worldwide, been translated into 17 languages, and spawned a foundation dedicated to teaching children about emotional intelligence and community building. "When I was 6 years old," Emma began, her voice carrying easily to the back of the room, "I thought being a matchmaker was simple. You just looked at lonely people, figured out what they needed, and pushed them together until they realized they belonged." Laughter rippled through the audience as Emma's timing proved as impeccable as her message. "What I didn't understand then was that I wasn't just making matches, I was teaching people how to be brave enough to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, and hope over resignation." In the front row, Marcus and Charlotte sat with their 2-year-old son, David, on Marcus's lap, all three wearing matching Team Emma t-shirts that had been David's contribution to the day's preparation. Charlotte was visibly pregnant with their second child, due in 3 months, and Marcus kept one protective hand on her shoulder while using the other to prevent David from escaping toward the stage. "My parents taught me that love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose to create, nurture, and share," Emma continued. "But sometimes people forget how to make that choice. Sometimes they need a reminder that they deserve to be happy. And sometimes they need someone brave enough to show them what happiness could look like." The speech was part of Emma's acceptance of the Young Humanitarian Award, recognition for the volunteer work she'd been doing through their family's official matchmaking foundation. What had started as Emma's casual observations about lonely neighbors had evolved into a nonprofit organization that taught children and adults Alike how to build stronger communities through intentional kindness and emotional awareness. Mrs. Patterson, now 81 and serving as the Foundation's volunteer coordinator, sat in the third row next to her husband of 3 years, Professor Williams. Their late-in-life romance had become legendary in their neighborhood, proving that Emma's gift for seeing potential connections wasn't limited by age demographics. "The thing about matchmaking," Emma said, warming to her favorite subject, "is that it's never really about the romantic relationships. Those are just the most obvious examples. Real matchmaking is about helping people find their missing pieces, whether that's a life partner, a best friend, a mentor, or even just someone who understands what they're going through." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word from this remarkable young woman who spoke with the wisdom of someone twice her age. In our Foundation's work, we've learned that loneliness is an epidemic, but it's also completely preventable. Every person in this room has the power to change someone's life simply by paying attention, showing up, and being brave enough to care about strangers. Emma paused to scan the audience, her gaze stopping briefly on various faces that told stories of their own struggles and triumphs. "5 years ago, my papa was eating sad sandwiches every night because he thought being a good father meant sacrificing his own happiness. Charlotte was sitting alone in coffee shops, convinced that she was destined to be overlooked and forgotten. I was just a kid who noticed that 2 lonely people were making each other lonelier by staying strangers." She gestured toward her family. In the front row, where David had managed to escape Marcus's hold and was now attempting to climb onto Charlotte's lap despite her pregnant belly. Today, we have a family that includes not just the 3 of us who started this story, but also David and baby Sophia, who's arriving this summer, and all the people whose lives have been touched by the simple revolutionary act of choosing to connect instead of remaining isolated. Emma pulled out a worn purple notebook, the same one Charlotte had given her years ago, now filled with hundreds of observations and success stories. This notebook contains the names of 47 couples who are now married because someone noticed they belong together. It has the contact information for 63 people who found their best friends through our community connection events. It documents the formation of 12 business partnerships, 8 creative collaborations, and 1 very successful knitting circle that started when I noticed 5 different people at the library, all struggling with the same scarf pattern. The laughter that followed was warm and appreciative, the kind that comes from recognizing universal truths about human nature. But the most important thing in this notebook isn't any of those success stories. It's the reminder I wrote on the first page when I was 7 years old. People are not puzzles to be solved. They are hearts waiting to be understood. Emma closed the notebook and looked directly at her parents, her expression soft with gratitude and love. "My parents didn't just teach me how to see what people needed. They taught me how to be what people needed. Charlotte showed me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say yes when you're scared. Papa showed me that true strength comes from being vulnerable enough to let people help you. Together, they showed me that the best families aren't born, they're chosen, created, and built one brave decision at a time." The standing ovation that followed was immediate and sustained, but Emma only had eyes for her family. Marcus was wiping away tears he didn't bother to hide, while Charlotte was beaming with the kind of pride that came from watching someone you love step fully into their purpose. As Emma stepped down from the podium, she was immediately surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories of connection and transformation. A shy teenager asked for advice about making friends at a new school. An elderly man wanted to thank her for inspiring his decision to join a community garden where he'd found both purpose and companionship. A young mother sought guidance about teaching her own children to notice and respond to others' needs. Emma handled each interaction with the grace and wisdom that had made her a sought-after speaker despite her age. She listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and offered practical suggestions that came from years of real-world experience in the art of human connection. Later that evening, the Rodriguez-Walsh family gathered in their backyard for their traditional post-event celebration. The same garden where Marcus and Charlotte had been married now contained a playground for David, raised beds where they grew vegetables together, and a fire pit surrounded by comfortable chairs that had hosted countless gatherings of friends, neighbors, and Emma's various matchmaking success stories. Charlotte was reading the evening news article about Emma's speech while Marcus grilled hamburgers, and David helped by providing running commentary about the proper way to flip meat. The scene was domestic and peaceful, the kind of ordinary magic that had become their family's specialty. "Listen to this quote they included," Charlotte said, reading from her phone. "Emma Rodriguez-Walsh represents a new generation of leaders who understand that social change begins with individual acts of courage and compassion. Her work reminds us that building stronger communities isn't about grand gestures. It's about paying attention to the people around us and refusing to accept loneliness as inevitable." Emma looked up from where she was teaching David how to arrange kindling for their evening fire. "Do you think that's true, Papa? That we're really changing things?" Marcus considered the question while transferring hamburgers to a platter. Around them, the garden was alive with evidence of the connections. Emma had fostered wind chimes gifted by Mrs. Patterson, herbs planted by their neighbor who had found love through Emma's introduction, children's artwork from the families who had become part of their extended community. "I think," he said carefully, "that you've taught all of us that love is always a choice, and choosing love is always revolutionary." Charlotte reached for Emma's hand, pulling her down to sit beside her on the garden bench. "What you've done, sweetheart, is prove that one person really can change the world, one heart, one connection, one brave decision at a time." David abandoned his fire-building project to climb onto the bench between his parents and big sister, creating the kind of impromptu family huddle that had become their evening ritual. "Tell the story again," he demanded with the insistence of someone who never tired of hearing about his family's origin tale. "Tell about the umbrella and the giant and the little girl who wasn't scared." Emma laughed, settling David more comfortably against her side. "Once upon a time, there was a little girl who noticed that her papa was eating too many sad sandwiches." As she began the familiar story, Marcus caught Charlotte's eye across their children's heads. In that shared glance was gratitude for the rainy afternoon that had changed everything, pride in the daughter who had refused to accept loneliness as permanent, and excitement for all the tomorrows still to come. The story Emma told David that night was the same one she'd shared with thousands of people over the years, but it never got old because it was really a story about the most important truth any of them had learned, that families aren't just born. They're built by people brave enough to choose each other, day after day, one small act of love at a time. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that choice begins with a 6-year-old girl who declares Papa needs a wife and refuses to take no for an answer. In the Rodriguez-Walsh family, that was still considered the best kind of beginning possible. After all, every great love story started with someone brave enough to push a shy woman toward a gentle giant and trust that love would figure out the rest. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.